Then. Hi, everyone. I have Cath here on the podcast with me today. Cath, welcome.
Oh, it's lovely being on someone else's pod. Thanks for having me.
So, for our listeners, Cath is a podcaster herself, as she mentioned. She's a former publicist, author of the book Currently Between Husbands, where she writes about challenges of separation and divorce, solo parenting, dating in midlife, following her separation with NRL star Andrew Johns. So that's why I wanted to get you on to get all your expertise, and particularly because for this particular caller that's called in, she's a new single mum, and I can only imagine how tough that would be, particularly in the early days. So yeah, your expertise on this one would be great. What we're going to do first, Cath, is we'll cut straight to the caller now.
Hi, Leonie. Love the podcast and the honesty that so many people are bringing about their challenges as parents. My confession is that I have recently gone through a divorce which was soul destroying, and I'm struggling to bounce back. I have a 2 and 4-year-old and 70% custody. I feel like I'm going through the motions day to day with the kids, with my job. I'm so caught up in the guilt around our family being torn apart, the guilt that my children are now in a broken home, the guilt that I fucked them up for life, that it's crippling me. I do see a therapist, but I guess why I called in was I want to know if other people are experiencing this too. If they are, what strategies do they have in place to help manage their mental health during this difficult time?
Right. So, Cath, I mean, I feel like where do we begin? So she's, we've got this particular caller. She's in the throes of the, early divorce. Talk to us a little bit about how that felt for you, I guess, to normalize this for this particular caller.
Look, at the time, I was the only person in my world that was was about to go through a divorce, and so I didn't have anyone close to me to talk about it with. Hence, kind of writing the book years later. But when it first happens, you're in shock. There's grief. You're mourning the relationship. Your identity has changed because for so long you've been used to being a Mrs. or a part of or a two. So there's so much stuff that goes on, and it is. I always say to people, just be really kind and gentle to yourself. And the reality is, it might take. For me, it took 2 years. It felt like it took 2 years cycles of everything happening to really sort of feel comfortable in my skin again.
I know it really is, isn't it? And it's that whole. I can only imagine, particularly as a parent, that level of guilt that you'd be feeling that your kids are now, implicated in the decision for you guys to part ways, and so they're moving from home to home. And I mean, how was that for you?
Look, I think Lewis was 5 when it happened, and we talk about it now. He's 13 and a half, and he really didn't remember a time with Dad and I together. He had a few memories, but not too many. So in my case, and probably for your listener who's got 2 youngies, 2 and 4, in a way that is actually more beneficial to the child. I've talked to friends whose parents have divorced when they were 17, 18 into their 20s, and it's a lot of it's very different, I think, than a child, being so small. But the reality is too, I mean, we've all heard stories of people who've stayed together for the kids, and then the kids have gone, we wish you'd split up years ago because we had to live and listen to the arguments, or even not arguments, feel the tension. But it is like there's so many firsts when it happens. And I remember, like, there are so many tears, and for any listeners going through this, that's okay. Like, suddenly you'll stop crying, as one friend of mine said to me, and I was like, yeah, you're right. But you do, and it's weird things like having to ask your teacher, your son or daughter's teacher, for 2 reports now, and 2 school meetings, and just things that you never think will trip you up. Or being in the park. I remember I used to struggle being in the park because Lewis was real park age, and pushing him on the swings, and everyone else was in couples, and I felt like I had a real big sign over my head that's like, loser, marriage didn't work out. It's a lot. It's a lot, and you can't sugarcoat it. It is a really tough time, but it gets better and better and better. It really does. There is so much light and hope at the end of the tunnel, and a lot of laughs and changes, and so for me, I wrote the book our marriage ended like 2 weeks before my 40th. And I remember my birthday's Christmas Day. I remember lying in bed on Christmas Day, I turned 40, like crying, thinking, oh my God, this is the end of the world. I've become a solo parent. I'm divorced. I've only just turned 40. Who's going to love me? You know, all of that sort of stuff. You know, and I look back now, 7 years on, and I'm like, that was the end of a chapter. And then another great one started. You know, so it is not the end of the world. It's just the end of a marriage.
Even if it does feel like it at the time, right? You know, do you think time has helped you heal, or what do you think?
1,000,000%, you know, and I say that in the book. You know, it's going to take time, and it's going to take longer than you want it to, but it does get better. I mean, they say it's like a death. You know, it's the grief, losing the relationship, you know, and the tricky thing is you have to see the person that's died, in inverted commas, you know, for drop-offs and pickups. And so it's not like a relationship that might have ended, you know, when you were younger and there was no children involved and you could literally delete them from Facebook and never see them again. You know, when you share a child, it's kind of forever. So yeah, time definitely heals, and therapy. I don't know if you can hear the leaf blowers. That everyone has decided to start a leaf blower here.
Oh no, all good. I can't.
And I'm like, oh my gosh. But yeah, you have to do things for your mental health. You have to. For me, the non-negotiables were like exercise every day. Even if you literally don't want to get out of bed, it's like exercise every day. And really, for me, seeing a therapist helped. So however that is for you, I found somebody who was like a life coach and an energy healer, and she gave me some really good playing it forward rather than sitting on a sofa telling someone your story. It was like, I kind of want some tools of how I can get through this in the most positive way for me, for my child, and, you know, and for my ex too, because it's bumpy, you know, that the divorce period is bumpy.
Yeah, it is like a death, as you said. I can't even imagine. Question, how did you go? Because I think one of the hardest parts is being separated from your children, right? This particular caller has 70% custody. Firstly, I'm like, gosh, having your child for, you know, on your own, you know, I'm like already intimidated by that. And you know, that goes off to all the single parents out there, because, you know, it's just a lot of work, I can only imagine. But there's also that 30% of the time when you're by yourself, let's call it, in her case. So I can only imagine you're walking past your child's bedroom, they're not there, you don't, you know, you've got that emotional tie, you can't see them because the agreement is this or whatever it looks like. Talk to us about how that was for you.
Look, Andrew was, when you know, when we were together, he was and still is a commentator. He'd finished his rugby league career, but he was away a lot. So I was already, I didn't feel like a solo parent, but I suppose I was doing a lot of stuff on my own because he was away. And, you know, the games are Friday night, Sunday, you know, usually when it's family time, because of the nature of his work, he was away. So I was already quite used to my time with Lewis alone, but it is those times that they're not with you. It's so hard. And, you know, we all have those moments when you've got young kids, especially, where you're like, oh my God, I would just love you to go away for a week so I can sleep and go to the toilet on my own and shower and watch my shows and not have to watch like whatever kids show you're into. But as soon as your child is away and it's not by choice, it's really hard. One thing I say in the book, and I do say to sort of people in the early days of going through this, is remember that your child, when they're not with you and they're with your ex, is with the other person that loves them most in the world is you, you know, and you have to really believe that and let go, because you cannot control anything that happens when your child is not with you and with the other parent. You can't control what they eat, what they see, what time they go to bed, you know, like any of it. And so I think knowing that kind of, I sort of let go of a lot of control, and it was just an easier way to accept that, you know, Lewis wasn't with me. And rather than going, oh my God, what if he's up late and he's out of his routine, and what if he's having Coke and burgers, you know, all of the things that when you're in a relationship you can say to your other half, no, we don't do that, you know, whereas when you're not together you can't. But there is definitely that that's the best advice, you know, I think I can give to someone, is just let go of trying to control when they're not with you, because you cannot control it, and it just gives you angst and heartache.
Absolutely. I mean, talking about not being able to control what happens, in the other household, did you ever fear, or, were you ever hesitant around the idea around, well, your ex finding someone new and then that person being the, co-parenting with you too? I mean, I think that's a real stress for a lot of people who are newly single. I mean, talk to us a little bit more about that.
I think when it comes to your ex repartnering, you have no control over it. Again, that's something that you could drive you bonkers, and you have to let it go. Andrew moved on quite quickly, but the partner he had for the first year lived in America, so she kind of was in the house in blocks, and she wasn't there too much. And then I was really fortunate. He repartnered with a great girl called Kate. They have a 4-year-old now. She's a lovely woman, and so I've just had a positive experience with it. And I think, for people listening, just always try and be respectful to whoever's around your child. I think the better relationship you can have with them is if you can make it a positive relationship for everyone, because again, they suddenly have a child in their life that isn't biologically theirs, which comes, I know from having friends who have, stepchildren around them, that comes with some difficulties and some learnings. And I always think you've just got to kind of come at these things with love and respect, as much as possible, and just hope that they repartner with someone who's, kind, is all you really want. You don't sort of want anything else. You just want someone to be kind to your child.
Absolutely. And perhaps share similar values to yourself, because again, I think that, one of the big fears is that transition between households, and perhaps, the way that they do it over in their household is not the same as mine. And for whatever reason, now I'm worried because my child feels confused. And, did you notice aspects of, changes in behavior from your child, like at the time, like any guidance you could provide around that?
No, we were really lucky. Andrew and I have always had a pretty straightforward relationship when it's come to co-parenting. We have a really open discourse, and no problems there. And we were always the co-parents that, if something changed date-wise, it wasn't like, well, you've lost that day. It was like, yeah, no problem, we'll move it around. So, while I would not say that he and I are best friends by any stretch, when it comes to co-parenting, we do it really well. And there are challenges along the way. When Lewis was in sort of primary school, it was more straightforward. But as they get older and they need more textbooks or laptops or sport kits on different days, that brings challenges, having to buy 2 of things, or really make sure that now have you got everything for the days you're with me, so I do feel guilty when it comes to things like that for Lewis. I think he has that extra sort of, as well as being a kid, it's these extra things he has to think of that somebody else, in a household with mum and dad doesn't have to think about. But it's funny, the other day he was able to sort of share with me that he'd talked and helped one of his friends sort of talk about their parents who were just separating. So I think he's sort of got that experience and knowledge and wisdom, even though he's only 13, to be able to let his mate know it's going to be okay, and things will work out. So yeah, I just think it's a waste of time feeling guilty about what goes on with your kids. It's really about communicating with them. Early days, I think maybe 2 years into the separation, I took Lewis to see a child psychologist just as a check-in, just for him to express to her how he was and where he was. And we only did 2 sessions, and she was like, look, I think he's transitioned really well. So I think that's definitely money well spent if you are concerned about how your child or children are kind of navigating the end of the relationship.
That's a great one. Did you ever receive, I'm sure you received questions like, I don't understand. Why aren't you and Dad happy? Why do I have to have 2?
Yeah.
I guess it's such a broad question, but just generally from your experience and perhaps the experience of others, any sort of hot tips around how to navigate those?
With Lewis it was pretty straightforward, and he was at an age, I think you have to also talk to your child at an age appropriate way. And, you know, one thing I would say, I'm not sure it's answering your question, is even if you wish them harm, do not speak badly about, you know, your ex in front of the children or child, or even if they're in the house and you're on the phone to someone. Just be so mindful, because little ears pick up everything, because we know. And I just think it's not for them to know that, you know. And it's you know, I know that people get pushed, you know, when divorce happens, as I said, it's bumpy, it's not always nice. But if you can always try and keep that away from them, you know, like silly things like early days when I had Lewis at home, you know, and I was really upset, if I would drop him at school and then I would cry, you know, I would put him to bed and then I would cry quietly in the lounge, like things that you just have to manage around children, because of course you have feelings and you want to let all these things out, but it's just, you know, trying to sort of minimize what they're seeing mum or dad upset, you know. And I definitely, things like social media, you know, don't put that stuff on social media about them. You know, you always see it pop up in your feed, and you want to say to that person, it's not for social media. If he's being an arse or whatever, like, just keep it away from social media. It's because it just feeds it. And, you know, it's just, I think it's try and keep it to your best mates or a therapist, you know, that stuff. Don't kind of post it online. Write a book like I did.
Because, yeah, I guess for you is the added complexity of, you know, having a high profile divorce, right? And, you know, here we are. I mean, I'm nowhere near as well known as yourself, and I can only imagine the impact I'd be feeling with friends and family, understanding what was going on in my life, and I'm a failure, blah blah blah. But it's very different when it goes to the media and big and public. I mean, did that add, I can only imagine, an extra layer of complexity for yourself as well?
Yeah, I mean, look, I laugh now and say I didn't have to change my Facebook status to single, you know. It was all over the Daily Mail and the Daily Telly and wherever else. But yeah, of course, because you feel like you failed on a grand scale. You know, it's not just your closest friends and family that know that things have, you know, gone tits up. Like, everyone does. And for me, like, Andrew moved on with Daniel Craig's ex-fiance. So suddenly there were some really hideous photos of me, and then photos of her on Daniel Craig's arm looking glamorous at the Oscars. And, you know, there's me without my eyebrows in a photo from 2007 where I look pregnant when I'm not. And you're like, awesome. This is great, you know. So that was, you know, and talk about, you know, Googling your ex's new partner. There's plenty to Google there. It wasn't just a quick Facebook stalk. I was like, awesome. But yeah, it did have that added glare, I suppose, on, you know, on me. But I'd worked in the media for a long time. I'd worked in TV and radio, and I understood how it worked as a publicist. And I learned you don't comment, you know, when they call for a comment, you don't, because you give them a comment, it's another day in the newspaper. And you just had to sort of take a step back. So yes, but again now, you know, but I'll still do something and it'll be like Joey's ex, blah blah blah, and I'm like, one day maybe it'll just be Cathrine Mahoney does. But yeah, I also understand I was married to someone who was, you know, top of his game and very very good at what he did. So yes, but we can laugh now, can't we?
Oh, I love it. I just love the humor from you too, like, you know, and the lessons. And I think, you know, again, congratulations on the book. I hope this particular caller, hopefully we've been able to normalize what you're going through. I mean, what is it, like over 50% of families end in divorce, or I don't know, some crazy statistic like that? Do you know the statistic?
I think it's over 50% now. I know, it's crazy. It's crazy, and sadly it happens to lots of us, you know. But it's okay, and it gets better, you know, it really does. And in my book, I like, I'm very self-deprecating. I'm a big oversharer. You know, the first chapter is like, does my rock bottom look big in this? Where I had a disaster in LAX airport and didn't get on the flight. And yeah, I talk about Tinder and first dates and first sex with someone that isn't your husband, and just, you know, because it's real, and it, you know, there wasn't a book like this on the shelves. Like, I wanted like a Bridget Jones book out there. I didn't want a self-help book. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to feel like I wasn't the only one, and I wanted to know that it's going to be a happy ending, you know, and there really is.
I love that. Look, we'll put a link to your book in the show notes as well, for those listening who would like to purchase. And so any final words of advice to this particular caller and before we wrap up?
I would just say, you know, to just get out there when she's ready. You know, certainly don't feel guilty, because that is a waste of energy that you could be putting into your kids. Yeah. You know, that everything she is going through is normal, that there are, you know, millions of women around the world that have sort of gone there before her. But yeah, I always say keep your friends really close. You know, don't tell your story to everyone, you know, because I think sometimes then it takes energy and everyone wants the negative and they want to pick the bones out of your story and all pile on your ex, and that's not helpful. But yeah, you know, and when she's ready, you know, it's actually wonderful to go on a date again and to have the butterflies and have the first kisses of someone. And, you know, I think there is lots of excitement out there. And also tell her, like, well, you know, blink and her kids will be at school. 2 and 4 is tricky. 2 and 4 is tricky even with a husband. It's busy, you know, and in a couple of years, life will just feel so much easier. So yes, I hope that helps.
I love that. How can people find out more about you and all of the glorious initiatives that you've got going on, Cath?
I've got, I have a podcast that's been going for 3 years called So I Quit My Day Job, where I talk to people who've made amazing career flips from one thing to another and have followed their dreams. So that's quite inspirational. I have a national column with Body and Soul, which is in all the Sunday papers. I do Not Another Parenting podcast with Nova, with lovely Sarah McGillivray, and yeah, it's sort of Instagram and my book. So that's kind of me.
Amazing. Thanks so much again for your time, Cath. We really
thank you for having me, Leonie. Thank you.